Pay for your sister's wedding or you are no daughter of mine." My mother Brenda hissed those words across the mahogany dining table. She kept her index finger pressed hard against a white catering invoice, pushing it toward my water glass. My father Richard sat at the head of the table cutting his steak. "This family has made its choice," he said without looking up. I did not yell. I did not cry. I stood up, dropped a $20 bill on the table for my untouched wine, and walked out into the cold Colorado night. 5 days later, their luxury Aspen wedding venue canceled everything. That was 2 months ago. Before I tell you the rest of the story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Grape Vengeance if you believe family should not treat you like an automatic teller machine. I would love to know where you are watching from right now. Drop your age and your local time in the comments. My name is Muskan. I am 31 years old, and this is the story of how my own parents tried to destroy my financial future and how the truth flipped their world upside down. Now let me take you back to that Sunday dinner. The smell of roasted garlic and expensive red wine filled the room. My sister Lexi was 27, the golden child. She sat across from me, twirling a silver fork into her salad. Next to her sat her fiancé, Trent. He wore a cheap gray suit and spent the entire evening staring at his phone screen, his thumbs moving fast. He had not held a steady paycheck since he moved to Denver 2 years ago. My mother tapped her manicured nail against the invoice again. The sharp clicking sound echoed in the quiet room. "It is due by Tuesday, Muskan," Brenda said. Her tone held zero warmth. It was the same voice she used to order a coffee at the drive-thru, expectant, entitled. I picked up the piece of paper. As a forensic accountant, I spend 50 hours a week tracking down missing assets and analyzing financial portfolios. My eyes naturally scanned the line items. Imported white orchids, a champagne tower, filet mignon for 200 guests at a luxury mountain resort. Then my eyes hit the bottom right corner, $40,000. I worked for 10 years to build my savings. I lived in a tiny one-bedroom condo. I drove a reliable older sedan. I sacrificed vacations and new clothes to ensure I would never worry about an unexpected bill. "I am not paying this," I said. I kept my voice flat. Emotion was weakness in this house. Lexi dropped her fork. It clattered against her ceramic plate. She looked up, her eyes shining with instant practiced tears. "You want to ruin my special day. You have always been jealous of Trent and me." Trent did not look up from his screen, but I saw the corner of his mouth turn up into a smirk. He took a slow sip of his drink, letting Lexi fight his battle. Jealousy had nothing to do with it. Exhaustion did. For a decade, I was their emergency fund. When Lexi wrecked her car in college, I paid the deductible. When she needed textbooks, Brenda called me, crying until I wired the cash. I always folded. I always paid the toll to keep the peace. But this was a boundary I refused to cross. "I am your sister," I said to Lexi, "not a bank." Brenda leaned across the table. The heavy scent of her perfume mixed with the garlic, making my stomach turn. "Lexi deserves a beautiful day. You sit in that office all week, hoarding your paychecks. You have the money. It is time you pitched in for this family." Pitched in? She said it like she was asking me to bring potato salad to a picnic, not drain my life savings for a party. My father Richard finally stopped cutting his meat. He set his silver knife down on the white tablecloth. He always played the quiet peacemaker, content to let Brenda dictate the household rules. But when he spoke, the icy chill in his voice caught me off guard. "Muskan," Richard said, "your sister needs this. If you walk out on her now, over money, then we do not need you." I stared at the man who taught me how to ride a bike. My hands felt cold, my throat went dry. I waited for him to take it back to say he was just stressed. He just stared right back, his jaw tight, his eyes hard. That is when Brenda delivered the final blow. "Pay for your sister's wedding or you are no daughter of mine." The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked off the passing seconds. They waited for my usual routine. The apologies, the trembling lip, the moment where I swallowed my pride and opened my checkbook to buy their approval for just a little while longer. Instead, I reached into my leather purse. I pulled out a crisp $20 bill. I smoothed the crease with my thumb and placed it right in the center of the table. "For the wine," I said. Richard stood up, his napkin falling to the floor. "What are you doing? This family has made its choice," I told him. I turned my back on them. Lexi screamed something about me dying a bitter spinster. Brenda knocked her chair back against the wall with a loud thud. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked out the front door, leaving the house behind. The crisp Colorado night air hit my face, stinging my cheeks, and for the first time in my life, my chest felt incredibly light. I thought the worst was over. I assumed they would just scale back the catering, find a cheaper location, and stop calling me. I went back to my quiet life, assuming the silence meant they had moved on. I was wrong. 5 days later, the real nightmare began when my phone lit up with a frantic voicemail from Lexi. 5 days passed without a single word from my family. I spent those days buried in tax audits and asset trace reports at my desk. The silence from my parents felt like a rare gift. I assumed they had found another way to pay for the extravagant mountain wedding. I assumed they had simply moved on to a new victim. I was wrong. The quiet was just the water pulling back before a tidal wave. Thursday afternoon, my phone vibrated against my glass desk. The caller identification flashed my sister's name. I let it ring. I had zero interest in hearing another rehearsed guilt trip. It went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, my screen lit up again, a text message from my mother, Brenda. Then another, then 5 more in rapid succession. The chime of my notifications echoed in my small office like warning sirens. I picked up the device and tapped the voicemail icon. Lexi was not crying this time. She was shrieking. Her voice cracked with genuine panic pitched so high it hurt my ears. "How could you do this?" Lexi screamed into the receiver. "Trent just got off the phone with the resort. They canceled our reservation. They wiped us off the calendar. You called them, did you not? You spiteful, jealous witch. You canceled my wedding because you could not stand to see me happy." The message ended with a sharp click. I stared at the dark screen. I had not spoken to the resort. I did not even know the name of their event coordinator. I opened my text messages. Brenda had sent a barrage of accusations. "You are sick. Sabotaging your own sister is a new low even for you. Call them back right now and fix this. If Lexi loses her date, you will pay for the damages. I will sue you myself." I set the phone down face down. My hands did not shake. My heart rate stayed steady. Years ago, a threat from my mother would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have drafted a dozen different apologies begging her to believe I was innocent. I would have bent over backward to fix a problem I did not create. But that version of Muskan died a long time ago. I grew up learning that my needs were secondary. If the household budget was tight, Lexi still got private gymnastics lessons while I took the public bus to a part-time job at a grocery store. When Lexi turned 16, my parents bought her a brand new sedan with a red bow on the hood. When I turned 16, Richard handed me a bus pass and told me hard work builds character. I spent my teenage years watching my parents drain their bank accounts to fund Lexi's endless whims. That dynamic is exactly why I became a forensic accountant. I realized early on that money was the only real shield in this world. Numbers never lied. Numbers did not play favorites. I spent my 20s living in a cramped studio apartment, eating cheap meals, and putting every spare dollar into investments. I built a fortress of financial security around myself because I knew my parents would never offer me a safety net. They only viewed me as a resource to be mined. Brenda wanted to blame me for the canceled venue. Instead of arguing, I decided to find out what actually happened. I pulled my keyboard closer and opened a new browser tab. The Aspen Luxury Resort had a corporate billing department. I deal with corporate billing departments every day. I picked up my desk phone and dialed their main accounting line. A woman answered, her voice tired and monotone. "Accounts receivable," she said. "Hello," I replied using my crisp professional tone. "This is Muskan. I am calling regarding a flagged vendor account for a wedding under the name Lexi and Trent. We are updating our internal ledger and noticed a cancellation notice." The woman typed something on her end. I heard the clatter of keys. "Yes, I see the file. That reservation was terminated this morning." "Can you confirm the reason code for the ledger?" I asked, keeping my voice entirely detached. "Code 04. the woman said, sighing. Non-sufficient funds. The client attempted to put the initial deposit on a credit card last week. It bounced. We gave them a grace period to provide an alternate payment method. The groom, Trent, provided a second card yesterday. That one triggered a fraud alert in our merchant system. The card was reported stolen. We canceled the contract and banned the client from rebooking. Understood. Thank you for the clarification, I said, and hung up. I sat back in my leather chair. A cold smile spread across my face. Trent was broke. He wore expensive suits and drove a shiny leased sports car, but his pockets were empty. He could not even cover the basic deposit for a wedding he claimed he was funding. Worse than that, he tried to pay a luxury resort with a stolen credit card. I opened my professional software suite. As a certified fraud examiner, I have legal access to public civil court records, judgment registries, and background verification tools. I typed Trent's full legal name into the search bar. I selected the state of Colorado and hit enter. The screen populated with a long list of red flags. Trent was not the successful entrepreneur he claimed to be. The database revealed 3 active civil judgments against him for unpaid debts. 2 different apartment complexes had evicted him in the last 4 years. His credit score was practically non-existent. He was a textbook grifter, bouncing from one scam to the next, leaving a trail of unpaid bills in his wake. He was marrying Lexi because she was an easy mark. He saw my parents living in a nice suburban home driving nice cars and assumed they had deep pockets. He was holding out for a massive payday. He likely expected Richard to hand him a generous check on the wedding day, a down payment for a house that Trent would quickly funnel into his own empty accounts. I picked up my phone. Brenda had sent 3 more text messages demanding I call the resort and confess my sabotage. Lexi had left another voicemail crying about her ruined dreams. I could have sent them the screenshot of Trent's civil judgments. I could have called Brenda and told her the man she wanted me to fund was a common con artist. I could have warned them that Trent was using them for a payout that did not even exist. But I looked at the text where my mother called me a spiteful witch. I remembered my father looking me in the eye and telling me they did not need me. They wanted a villain. I decided to let them fight the ghosts they created. I locked my phone and placed it in my desk drawer. I would not say a word. I would let them panic. I would let Trent sweat as he tried to spin a web of lies to explain why the venue rejected his payment. Let them tear each other apart. I went back to my audit reports, enjoying the profound peace of mind that comes with knowing you are entirely untouchable. My silence, however, was the one thing Brenda could not handle. Denied her usual punching bag, my mother decided to escalate the situation. If she could not force me to pay for the wedding in private, she would try to destroy my reputation in public. An hour later, my desk phone rang again. This time it was not an angry family member. It was Diane, the senior partner at my accounting firm. Her office was just down the hall. "Muscan?" Diane said, her voice unusually stern. "Can you come into my office? Close the door behind you. We have a serious problem." I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the corner office. My footsteps made no sound. Diane built this accounting firm from nothing. She was a 60-year-old woman with steel gray hair and a gaze that could cut glass. She demanded perfection. She did not tolerate personal drama spilling into her business. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. If Diane was calling me in, something was terribly wrong. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. Diane sat behind her desk. She did not look up from her monitor right away. She gestured toward the leather guest chair. I sat down, keeping my posture straight. Finally, she turned her screen off and folded her hands over a manila folder. "Human Resources received a very troubling phone call 20 minutes ago," Diane said. Her tone was flat, unreadable. "A woman claiming to be your mother left a voicemail for our director. I asked them to forward the audio file directly to me." My throat went dry. Brenda. She could not force me to pay for the wedding at the dinner table, so she was coming after my livelihood. I opened my mouth to explain, but Diane held up one hand to stop me. She clicked her mouse. The computer speakers crackled to life. My mother's voice filled the quiet office. Brenda sounded breathless. She was putting on her best distress performance. "Hello," Brenda said on the recording. "My name is Brenda. I am Muscan's mother. I am calling out of deep concern. My daughter is undergoing a severe mental breakdown. She is acting erratic and vindictive. I am terrified she might do something dangerous at work." She handles sensitive financial data for your clients, and I feel a moral obligation to warn you. She is not in her right mind. She is a liability to your company." The audio ended. The silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush my lungs. My own mother just tried to get me fired. She tried to take away my ability to pay rent, buy groceries, and survive. She knew I worked 50 hours a week to earn my position here. She knew I had no safety net. She wanted me destitute. She wanted me crawling back to that house on my knees, begging for a place to sleep so she could finally control me again. I looked Diane in the eye. I did not cry. I refused to let my mother reduce me to a weeping child in front of my boss. "Diane," I said, "that woman is my mother, but every word she just said is a fabricated lie. My sister is getting married. My parents demanded I pay $40,000 for the catering. I refused and walked out. This is her retaliation." Diane leaned back in her chair. She studied my face for a long moment. I braced myself for the termination speech. I expected her to say she could not risk the firm's reputation. Instead, Diane let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "When I was 32 years old, my father tried to ruin my credit," Diane said. "He opened 3 credit cards in my name to pay off his gambling debts. When I caught him, he called my boss and told them I was embezzling money. He thought if I lost my job, I would be too poor to hire a lawyer and press charges." I stared at her, stunned. Diane never shared personal details. She was a fortress of professionalism. "Toxic people attack your wallet when they can no longer control your mind," Diane continued. "Your mother wants you broken. She wants you desperate. I am not firing you, Muskan. You are my best forensic auditor, but I am giving you a direct order. Take the rest of the afternoon off. Go home, lock down your credit, check every financial account tied to your name. Prepare for war." I thanked her, my voice thick with gratitude. I walked back to my cubicle and grabbed my purse. When I reached my car in the parking garage, I pulled my personal cell phone out of my bag. I had kept it on silent all morning. The screen was overflowing with notifications. 72 missed calls, over 100 text messages. My social media application showed endless red alerts. I opened Facebook. Brenda had tagged me in a public status update. She broadcasted the post to all 800 of her friends, plus the entire congregation of her local church group. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The post read, "Please pray for our family during this dark time. My oldest daughter, Muskan, has turned her back on us. Out of pure jealousy and spite, she is trying to ruin her younger sister's beautiful wedding. Lexi is heartbroken. Muskan even called the mountain resort and canceled their venue out of malice. We raised her to value family, but money and greed have turned her into a bitter stranger. Please keep Lexi in your prayers." Below the post, the comment section was a feeding frenzy. Neighbors I had known since childhood were tearing me apart. People who smiled at me in the grocery store were calling me a monster. I opened my voicemails. The first was from my Aunt Susan. "You ungrateful brat," she snapped. "Your parents gave you everything. You owe your sister an apology. Do not bother coming to Thanksgiving this year." The second voicemail was from Mrs. Higgins, the head of the church bake sale. "Muskan, I saw your mother's post. I am so disappointed in you. Breaking your parents' hearts over a party is a sin. You need to repent and pay them back." My phone buzzed in my hand. Another text from Brenda. "See what happens when you turn your back on blood, quote? Everyone knows what you are now. Call the venue, pay the bill, and I will take the post down." She was holding my public reputation hostage. She thought public shaming would break my resolve. She thought I cared about the opinions of people who believed a Facebook post without asking for my side of the story. I did not reply. I did not post a defense. A good auditor knows that arguing with liars only gives them the attention they crave. Let them talk. Let them type their hateful comments. Their words could not hurt my bank account. I drove straight to my condo. I locked the deadbolt, brewed a pot of strong black coffee, and sat down at my dining table. I opened my personal laptop. Diane's advice echoed in my head: prepare for war. I navigated to the Federal Credit Reporting Portal. As a certified fraud examiner, I knew exactly how to track hidden assets and stolen identities. I typed in my Social Security number, passed the security questions, and requested a comprehensive report from all 3 major bureaus. I expected to see my pristine financial history. I spent a decade cultivating a perfect score. I paid off my student loans early. I never carried a balance on my credit cards. I expected to see a blank slate. The page loaded. My eyes jumped to the top right corner. My stomach plummeted. My credit score had dropped by 120 points. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. This had to be a reporting error. I scrolled down past my legitimate accounts, hunting for the discrepancy. There it was, a personal loan. The principal amount was $50,000. The origination date was exactly 6 months ago. The status showed 6 on-time payments, which meant whoever took out the loan was actively paying the minimum balance to keep it hidden from collection agencies. I clicked on the loan details. The digital signature on the application matched my legal name. The associated email address was a fake account I had never seen before. But the physical address tied to the application was painfully familiar. It was my parents' suburban house. I pulled the disbursement records. The lender had wired the $50,000 directly into a joint checking account at a local credit union. I recognized the routing number. It was the same bank where Richard and Brenda kept their primary savings. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My parents did not just want me to pay for Lexi's wedding. They had already stolen from me to fund her lifestyle. They took out a fraudulent loan in my name half a year ago. They were hoping to bleed my actual savings dry before I ever noticed this ticking time bomb attached to my Social Security number. I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the screen. They tried to ruin my career today, but 6 months ago they committed federal fraud. My mother wanted a war. She was about to learn that you never pick a financial fight with a forensic accountant. Tomorrow morning I would stop playing defense. Tomorrow the police would get involved. The glow of the computer monitor illuminated my dark kitchen. $50,000. I read the number again, tracing the digits on the screen with my index finger. My breath hitched in my chest. This was not a banking error. This was a calculated strike against my financial independence, executed by the 2 people who raised me. I clicked the digital loan agreement. The lender was a prominent online bank known for fast approvals. I scanned the applicant information, my name, my Social Security number, my date of birth, but the contact phone number was a prepaid cellular line I did not recognize, and the email address was a generic account created just days before the application date. Then I scrolled down to the electronic signature. It was dated 6 months ago, April 14th. I closed my eyes, letting my memory rewind to that specific week. April 14th was a Tuesday. Lexi had just announced her engagement to Trent. Brenda had hosted a lavish dinner party at a local country club to celebrate. I remembered sitting at that table watching my parents toast to my sister's future while I quietly drank my water. I also remembered leaving my purse in the coat room for 3 hours. My driver's license, my Social Security card, my bank statements, everything they needed to steal my identity sat unguarded while they poured champagne. The realization hit me hard, knocking the wind out of my lungs. They did not just want me to pay $40,000 for a wedding venue. That demand was a smokescreen. They had already stolen $50,000 to fund Lexi's lifestyle. They were making the minimum monthly payments on this fraudulent loan just to keep the debt out of collections. But they knew they could not keep up those payments forever. Their plan was brilliant in its cruelty. They wanted to force me to drain my actual savings account for the wedding. If I handed over my cash, I would be broke. When this secret loan eventually defaulted and destroyed my credit, I would have no resources left to hire an attorney. I would be trapped, ruined, and powerless to fight back. A normal daughter might have picked up the phone. A normal daughter might have called her father crying, begging for an explanation. She might have driven over to their suburban house and demanded answers on the front lawn. I did none of those things. I am a forensic accountant. I hunt liars for a living. I stood up, walked to my home office, and turned on my heavy-duty laser printer. I loaded a fresh ream of paper into the tray. I spent the next 4 hours doing what I do best. I built a paper trail. I started with the digital footprint. I logged into a specialized skip tracing database I use for work. I ran a reverse lookup on the fake email address attached to the loan. The recovery email linked directly to Richard's personal internet service provider account. Next, I pulled the IP address from the electronic signature timestamp. I cross-referenced it with public geolocation records. The signature did not originate from my condominium. It originated from a router located at my parents' address. My printer hummed, spitting out page after page of undeniable proof. Then I followed the money. The lender deposited the $50,000 into a joint checking account at a local credit union. Richard and Brenda were the sole account holders. Because I had the routing number and the transaction ID, I ran a partial ledger audit. The funds did not stay in that account for long. Within 48 hours of the deposit, Richard wired $15,000 to a luxury car dealership in Denver. That was the exact week Trent showed up driving his leased sports car. $10,000 went to a high-end travel agency for Lexi's engagement trip to Mexico. Another $5,000 went to a bridal boutique. My parents funded my sister's extravagant life using a debt chained to my name. They bought Trent a car using my credit score. They bought Lexi a vacation using my stolen identity. I organized the documents on my desk. I grabbed a thick black binder and a set of plastic dividers. I worked methodically the same way I prepared evidence for federal court cases. Tab 1 contained the loan application and the forged signature. Tab 2 held the IP address logs placing the fraud inside their living room. Tab 3 documented the cash transfers to the car dealership and the travel agency. I slid the pages into sheet protectors. The plastic crinkled under my hands. I did not feel sad. The stinging betrayal I felt during that Sunday dinner was gone. The hurt of being discarded had vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. My parents thought I was just a quiet, obedient bank account. They thought I would roll over and accept whatever abuse they handed out. They forgot what I did for 40 hours every single week. I dismantle financial criminals. Now my targets just happened to share my last name. By 3 a.m, the dossier was complete. It was a masterpiece of forensic auditing. It contained enough concrete evidence to secure a federal indictment for identity theft, wire fraud, and bank fraud. A judge would look at this binder and hand Richard a severe prison sentence. I closed the heavy cover of the binder. The dull thud echoed in the quiet room. I planned to take this folder directly to the police department when the sun came up. I was going to file a formal report, freeze my credit, and watch law enforcement raid my childhood home. I felt a surge of vindication. I went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, mapping out the route to the precinct in my head. But Brenda was always one step ahead when it came to manipulation. She knew I would eventually find out about the canceled venue. She knew I would not answer her text messages. She realized her social media smear campaign had not forced me to surrender. So she decided to strike first, using the one tool I never expected. Just as I set my water glass in the sink, a loud, sharp knock rattled my front door. It was not a polite tap. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of someone who demanded immediate entry. I glanced at the digital clock on my microwave. It was barely dawn. The sun had not even crested the mountains yet. I walked down the hallway, my bare feet quiet on the hardwood floor. I peered through the small glass peephole in the door. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my welcome mat. One had his hand resting near his radio. The other held a small notepad. My pulse spiked. For a brief, confusing second, I thought the bank had somehow alerted them to the loan. But that made no sense. The police do not show up at sunrise for a white-collar credit inquiry. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The cold morning air drifted into my entryway. "Muskan?" the taller officer asked, stepping forward. His tone was professional, but stern. "Yes," I said, keeping my hands visible. "How can I help you?" "We need to ask you some questions about a theft," he replied, flipping his notepad open. "Your sister Lexi filed a formal report last night. She claims you stole a $15,000 diamond engagement ring from her purse during a family dinner this past Sunday." I stared at him, the absurdity of the accusation hanging in the cold air between us. Lexi did not even own a $15,000 ring. The stone on her finger was a cheap synthetic gem Trent bought from a mall kiosk. But as I looked at the officer's serious expression, the trap snapped into perfect focus. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated extortion attempt. Brenda and Lexi knew the wedding venue was gone. They needed cash immediately. By filing a false police report, they were creating a fabricated crisis. I knew exactly how this game worked. Later today, Brenda would call me. She would offer to have Lexi drop the criminal charges if I simply paid them $15,000 in restitution. They thought they could terrify me into handing over my savings to stay out of a jail cell. They thought I was an easy target who would crumble at the sight of a badge. "Ma'am?" The officer prompted, his eyes narrowing slightly at my silence. "Do you want to invite us inside to discuss the events of Sunday evening?" I looked back at my home office down the hall, where my thick black binder of federal fraud evidence sat waiting on the desk. My family wanted to play dirty. They wanted to involve law enforcement. I smiled a genuine, calm smile that seemed to unsettle the officer. "I would be happy to discuss my sister's ring," I said, stepping back to let them inside. "In fact, I know exactly where it is." I led the two uniformed officers into my living room. They stepped carefully onto my hardwood floor, looking entirely out of place among my neat bookshelves and quiet morning routine. The taller officer pulled a small leather notepad from his breast pocket. The younger officer stood near the doorway, keeping his hands resting near his heavy utility belt. They treated me like a suspect. My family sent them here to intimidate me. "Miss Muscan, we appreciate your cooperation," the tall officer said, his tone flat and professional. "We received a formal complaint late last night from your sister Lexi. She stated that during a family dinner this past Sunday, she removed her diamond engagement ring to wash her hands in the kitchen. She alleges you went into that kitchen alone shortly after. When she returned, the ring was gone." He paused, letting the weight of the accusation hang in the cold morning air. "She values the item at $15,000, the officer continued. "In this state, the theft of property exceeding $2,000 is classified as a felony." I stood perfectly still. The sheer audacity of the lie washed over me. A felony charge. Brenda and Lexi were willing to ruin my life, send me to state prison, and strip away my certified public accountant license over a canceled party. They figured the threat of a criminal record would shatter my resolve. I knew exactly how this game worked. They planned to let the police terrify me for a few hours. Then Brenda would call me, playing the gracious peacemaker. She would offer a settlement, pay $15,000 in cash to cover the missing ring, and Lexi would drop the criminal charges. That money would miraculously cover the bounce deposit for their luxury mountain wedding. It was a classic shakedown dressed up as a police matter. They thought I would crumble. They expected me to cry, hyperventilate, and beg for a way to fix it. Instead, I offered the officers a polite smile. "I understand," I said. "Please step over to my kitchen island. I want to show you something." I walked over to my counter and woke up my laptop screen. I did not shake. My breathing remained steady. Years of conducting tense financial audits taught me how to handle hostile encounters. You never argue with an accusation. You simply drown it in undeniable proof. I logged into my condominium building's central security portal. I pay high homeowner association fees for a reason. I clicked on the video archives and pulled up the feed from Sunday night. "Gentlemen," I said, pointing at the high-definition monitor, "here is the camera facing the main lobby. Note the timestamp in the bottom corner. This is me arriving home exactly 22 minutes after I left my parents' house. I am holding my car keys and a small black clutch purse." I fast-forwarded the video timeline. Here is me emptying that clutch onto the lobby concierge desk to find my mail key. You can see my lipstick, my wallet, and my phone. No ring. I did not have any pockets on my dress. Next, I opened a new browser tab and pulled up my cellular location data. The grid tracked my movements down to the exact minute. "You can see my driving route," I explained, tracing the blue line on the map. "I drove straight here from their neighborhood. I did not stop at a gas station. I did not meet anyone in a parking lot. I came straight home." The younger officer frowned, jotting something down on his pad. "Ms. Muscan, footage of you coming home empty-handed is helpful. However, it does not prove you did not stash the items somewhere between their house and your building." I nodded. That was a fair assessment. It was the exact response I anticipated. "You are correct," I said, keeping my voice level, "but I have something much better. As a certified fraud examiner, I have authorized access to regional asset recovery networks. I checked the database last night while investigating a separate financial issue involving my family. I opened my secure work portal. I typed in my credentials for the state pawn shop registry. This database links every licensed pawnbroker in the region, tracking serial numbers, item descriptions, and seller identification to prevent the fencing of stolen goods. My sister's fiancé is a man named Trent, I said, typing his full legal name into the search bar. He claims to be a wealthy entrepreneur. In reality, he has a string of unpaid civil judgments against him. 3 days ago, while my sister claimed her ring was stolen by me, Trent walked into a pawn shop on the east side of Denver. I hit the enter key. The search results populated instantly. I clicked the top file and turned the monitor so both officers had a clear view of the bright screen. "This is a digital copy of the pawn ticket," I said. The tall officer leaned forward, his eyes scanning the document. The ticket listed a synthetic diamond ring set in cheap white gold. The serial number on the pawn receipt matched the exact serial number from the appraisal form Lexi had proudly posted on her social media months ago. "Notice the identification section," I pointed out. Trent presented his own state driver's license to complete the transaction. His signature is right there on the bottom line. He walked out of that shop with $2,000 in cash. The tall officer stopped writing. He stared at the pawn ticket on my screen. He looked at the signature, the copy of Trent's identification, and the date timestamp. Tuesday afternoon, 2 days after the Sunday family dinner. The atmosphere in my kitchen shifted instantly. The tension broke, replaced by a heavy, irritated silence from the law enforcement officers. Police officers hate being used as pawns in domestic extortion schemes. They hate having their time wasted by liars even more. "Your sister's fiancé sold the ring himself," the officer said, his tone dropping into a low growl. "Yes," I replied. "He sold it because he is broke. His credit card bounced when he tried to pay for their wedding venue. He pawned the ring to get fast cash. My sister and mother figured they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Blame the missing jewelry on me, file a false police report, and threaten me with arrest unless I paid them restitution. They wanted my money to rebook a venue." The younger officer sighed heavily, shaking his head. He looked at his partner. "Filing a false police report is a serious offense," the tall officer stated, closing his notepad with a sharp, echoing snap. "It wastes city resources and constitutes perjury. We will be paying your sister a visit this morning to discuss this discrepancy." I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a blank flash drive. "I will export the building footage, my location data, and the state pawn registry file right now. You can take it with you as evidence." As the files copied over to the drive, the officers apologized for the early intrusion. They went from treating me like a criminal to treating me like a cooperative witness. I handed them the small plastic drive. I asked for one thing in return. "Could you provide me with the case number for this incident?" I asked. The tall officer pulled a business card from his pocket, wrote a long string of numbers on the back, and handed it to me. I walked them to the door and locked the deadbolt behind them. I stood in my quiet entryway, holding that small piece of cardboard between my fingers. This tiny white card represented official police documentation of Lexi committing a crime. It was a loaded weapon. I walked back to my home office and tucked the card safely into the front pocket of my thick black fraud binder. My family thought they were closing in on my savings. In reality, they were handing me the exact tools I needed to dismantle their lives. But seeing Trent's pawn ticket raised a new glaring question. $2,000 was a pathetic amount of money. It would not even cover the catering deposit, let alone save the wedding. Trent pawning his future wife's ring proved he was desperate for cash right now. He was scrambling. It made me wonder who Trent owed money to. It also made me wonder why my parents were so desperate to fund this sham marriage in the first place. My parents were greedy, but they were not stupid. Why were they willing to commit federal loan fraud just to buy Lexi a husband who could not even afford his own car lease? I sat back down at my computer, cracking my knuckles. The police were handling the false report. It was time for me to dig into the real reason this wedding had to happen. I started pulling Trent's hidden financial records, and the dark truth I uncovered made my blood run cold. Trent did not just owe money to credit card companies. He was in deep with private, high-interest lenders, the kind of lenders who do not send polite letters in the mail. They send men in cheap suits to wait by your car. I tallied up the outstanding balances across 4 different shadow accounts, $110,000. My breath caught in my throat. Trent was drowning. His shiny leased sports car and tailored suits were a paper-thin facade over a mountain of dangerous debt. He was a cornered animal. But why would my parents want Lexi to marry a man who was financially radioactive? Richard and Brenda cared about appearances above all else. They wanted country club memberships and perfect holiday photos. They would never allow their golden child to tie herself to a broke grifter, unless they were blind to his reality, or unless they made a deal. I pivoted my search. I accessed the joint checking account Richard and Brenda used for the fraudulent loan. I ran a cross-reference query looking for any digital correspondence linked to that specific routing number. My search pulled up a chain of emails between my father and Trent. The subject line read, "Post-wedding escrow." I opened the first email. I read it twice to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. Richard had drawn up an informal contract. He promised Trent a $100,000 cash gift, explicitly labeled as a house deposit. But there was a catch. The money would only be released into Trent's private account after the marriage certificate was signed and filed with the county clerk. The entire relationship was a transaction, a sham. Trent was not marrying Lexi out of love. He was marrying her because my parents promised him a payout large enough to clear his dangerous debts. Richard and Brenda knew Trent was broke. They were buying Lexi a husband because they wanted the perfect suburban son-in-law to parade around their social circle. They struck a desperate bargain to keep up their own twisted facade of family perfection. Then, the final, sickening puzzle piece clicked into place. Richard and Brenda did not have $100,000 in cash. They were practically bankrupt, surviving on the $50,000 loan they fraudulently opened in my name. When Trent's creditors started breathing down his neck last week, he must have demanded an advance on the dowry. He needed cash immediately. That was why they cornered me at the Sunday dinner. That was why Brenda demanded $40,000 for catering. It was never about white truffles or champagne towers. The wedding vendors were a lie. They needed my savings to pay off Trent's thugs and keep the wedding intact. They were willing to drain my bank account, destroy my credit, and send me into poverty just to buy Lexi a fake marriage. I pushed my chair back from the desk. My hands felt cold. The sheer scale of their betrayal went far beyond favoritism. They viewed my life as fuel to burn for their own comfort. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies. It belonged to Marcus Vance. Marcus was a senior attorney downtown who specialized in white-collar identity theft and aggressive asset recovery. He was a shark. He did not negotiate, he destroyed. His assistant put me through immediately. "Muskan," Marcus said, his voice deep and gravelly. "I hope you are calling to offer your auditing services for my new corporate case." "I need to hire you as my counsel, Marcus," I replied. "This is personal. Give me the summary." My parents forged my electronic signature on a $50,000 personal loan. They funneled the money into their joint account. I have the IP logs, the transfer receipts, and the digital footprint proving they orchestrated the theft from their living room. Furthermore, they are currently attempting to extort me for more cash to pay off private debt collectors tied to my sister's fiancé. Silence hung on the line for 3 seconds. I heard the scratch of a pen on paper. "How far do you want to take this?" Marcus asked. He did not offer sympathy. He offered strategy. "I want the fraudulent loan scrubbed from my credit profile," I said, my voice steady. "I want the lender to pursue them for the principal balance, and I want to strike back at the assets they value most. I want them to feel the exact level of panic they tried to force onto me." "Come to my office at noon," Marcus instructed. "Bring the evidence binder." I arrived at his downtown high-rise exactly on time. The glass doors of his firm slid open, revealing a sleek lobby of polished marble. Marcus met me in his private conference room. He was a tall man in his late 50s, wearing a sharp navy suit. I slid the thick black binder across the glass table. He spent 20 minutes reading through my documentation. He scrutinized the IP logs. He examined the wire transfer receipts. He looked at the email chain promising Trent the fraudulent dowry. When he finally closed the binder, Marcus let out a low whistle. "Your audit is flawless," he said, tapping the plastic cover. "You handed me a loaded gun. We can file an identity theft affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission today. We will serve the bank with a formal notice of forgery. They will freeze your parents' joint account pending a criminal investigation." "Do it," I said. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Freezing their cash will stop the bleeding, but if you want to truly cripple their operation, we need to look at their physical assets, specifically their real estate. People who commit this type of desperate fraud usually have other skeletons in their financial closet. I want to run a title search on their primary residence. My parents' house? I asked. Yes, Marcus nodded. They live in a wealthy suburb. If they are broke enough to steal your identity, they are likely defaulting on their own mortgage. If they are underwater, we can leverage their debt against them. I agreed to his plan. I signed the retainer agreement, officially making Marcus my legal representation. I walked out of his office feeling a strange sense of calm. The fear that had stalked me since Sunday dinner was gone. I was no longer the victim of a toxic family dynamic. I was the architect of their downfall. I drove back to my firm to finish the afternoon shift. I needed to keep my routine normal. I sat at my cubicle auditing a routine tax file for a client, letting Marcus do the heavy lifting in the background. Around 4 in the afternoon, my secure email inbox chimed. It was a message from Marcus. He had completed the preliminary asset search on my parents. He found exactly what he was looking for regarding their mortgage defaults. But there was an attachment on the email that made my heart stop. Marcus had pulled the historical financial records attached to our family name. While digging through Richard's old banking history, the software flagged a dormant account. It was a trust fund. It had been opened 30 years ago under my late grandfather's name. I clicked the attachment, my hands suddenly trembling. My grandfather was the only person in that house who ever showed me genuine kindness. He passed away when I was 10. I always assumed he left nothing behind. I read the opening lines of the trust document, and the final shred of mercy I held for my father turned to ash. I stared at the glowing monitor. The digital attachment Marcus sent was a scanned copy of an irrevocable trust. The document bore the official raised seal of the state probate court. At the very top, printed in bold black ink, was the name of the grantor, William, my grandfather. He passed away 21 years ago. My chest tightened as a flood of suppressed memories rushed forward. William was a retired machinist who lived in a modest brick house on the edge of town. He smelled of peppermint and engine grease. When Brenda would banish me from the living room for talking too loud or interrupting Lexi, William would sit with me on his back porch. He was the only adult in that family who looked at me and saw a person instead of a burden. He taught me how to count change. He taught me how to budget my allowance. He taught me how to build a solid foundation. He died of a sudden heart attack when I was 10 years old. After his funeral, Brenda and Richard packed up his house, sold his belongings, and never spoke of him again. I assumed he left nothing behind. I was wrong. I scrolled down to page 3 of the PDF. Section 4 outlined the establishment of a beneficiary account. The principal sum was $75,000. The designated recipient was me. The legal language was unmistakable and ironclad. William explicitly earmarked those funds for my higher education and the eventual purchase of a primary residence. He appointed my father Richard as the sole executor. William trusted his own son to distribute the inheritance when I turned 18. My hands gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. $75,000. I thought about my grueling college years. I spent 4 years suffocating under the crushing weight of federal student loans. I worked a punishing morning shift at a campus coffee shop, attended demanding accounting classes in the afternoon, and scrubbed greasy floors at a local diner until midnight. I survived on cheap instant noodles. I walked 3 miles in the freezing snow because I could not afford a monthly transit pass. My boots had holes in the soles. Every single month, I panicked about making rent. Whenever I begged my parents for a small loan to buy expensive textbooks, Richard would shake his head. He would cross his arms and lecture me about the value of a strong work ethic. He told me financial struggle builds character. He said handouts create weak adults. He delivered those self-righteous lectures while sitting on my grandfather's legacy. I clicked the next attachment. Marcus had subpoenaed the historical transaction ledger for the trust account. I needed to see exactly where my money went. As a financial investigator, I am accustomed to reviewing stolen assets. I track missing corporate funds daily, but seeing my own name attached to a plundered account made my blood run ice cold. The first withdrawal occurred the exact month I enrolled in my local state university. But the cash did not go toward my tuition. Richard transferred $12,000 into his personal checking account. 3 days later, that exact amount was wired to an out-of-state private preparatory academy. Lexi was only 14 at the time. My parents were prepaying for her elite high school tuition using my college fund. I dragged the mouse down the screen, analyzing every line item. Each transaction was a separate, agonizing stab of betrayal. 2 years later, Richard siphoned another $20,000. He used the capital to fund a month-long European vacation for Brenda and Lexi. While I was burning my hands on industrial dishwashers in Colorado, my younger sister was posting photographs of herself eating gelato in Rome and shopping for designer handbags in Paris. Another withdrawal covered the down payment for Lexi's brand new sedan. Another paid for Brenda's kitchen remodel. By the time I graduated with a mountain of debt, the trust balance was zero. Richard drained every last cent. He embezzled the only gift my grandfather ever gave me. My father did not just play favorites. He committed severe fiduciary theft. He robbed his own child to bankroll a fantasy lifestyle for his preferred daughter. He watched me struggle, watched me skip meals, watched me exhaust myself to the point of physical illness, knowing he held the key to my security in his back pocket. A strange sensation washed over me. For my entire adult life, a tiny fraction of guilt had always lived in the back of my mind. A small voice constantly wondered if I should try harder to please them. I often wondered if I was truly the selfish, ungrateful daughter Brenda constantly accused me of being. That guilt evaporated instantly. It burned away, leaving nothing but absolute crystalline focus. This was no longer a domestic dispute over a canceled luxury wedding. This was not just about a forged $50,000 personal loan. This was a lifetime of calculated, methodical theft. They stole my past, and they were actively trying to steal my future. I hit the print button. The heavy-duty machine whirred to life, spitting out the trust documents and the withdrawal ledgers. I took a 3-hole punch, aligned the pages, and locked them into a brand new section of my thick black evidence binder. I sat back and took a slow, deep breath. The gloves were officially off. I would not just defend myself against their attacks anymore. I was going to dismantle their entire existence. I would take back every single thing they took from me with steep interest. My office phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. The sharp ringtone echoed in the quiet room. I checked the caller identification display. It was not Diane. It was not Marcus. It was Richard. My father was calling my direct work line. I let it ring 3 times, controlling my breathing, lowering my heart rate. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. "This is Muskan," I answered, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Sweetheart," Richard said. The false warmth in his tone made my skin crawl. He had not called me sweetheart in over a decade. Whenever a manipulator changes their tactics from aggression to sudden affection, they are setting a dangerous trap. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked. "I want to apologize," he replied, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "Things got out of hand at dinner on Sunday. Your mother is very stressed about the venue situation. Emotions ran high. I should not have said what I said. I was wrong." He paused, waiting for me to soften. I remained silent, letting the dead air stretch between us. "We are a family," Richard continued, clearing his throat. "Families fight, but we also forgive. I want to make things right. I want to secure your future just like a good father should." Hearing him mention my future right after I discovered he embezzled my inheritance required every ounce of professional restraint I possessed. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing at the sheer audacity. "How exactly do you plan to make things right?" I asked. "Let us meet for coffee tomorrow morning," Richard suggested. "Just the two of us. Neutral ground. I have a proposal. I had my attorney draft some paperwork. I want to make you a co-owner of the family home. I want to put your name on the deed. It is time we shared our wealth with you." A co-owner of the house. A sudden offer of real estate right after forging a $50,000 loan in my name. The strategy was so transparent it was almost insulting. He was not trying to give me a house. He was trying to trick me into signing an assumption of liability document. If I signed his paperwork, I would legally accept the fraudulent loan as my own personal debt, absolving him of federal fraud charges. He thought I was foolish. He thought a cup of coffee and a fake smile would convince me to chain myself to his sinking ship. He assumed I was still the desperate little girl craving his approval. "Coffee sounds lovely," I said, a dangerous smile spreading across my face. "Send me the address. I will see you tomorrow morning." I hung up the phone. The trap was set, and my father was walking right into it. The morning sun reflected off the glass front of the local coffee shop. I parked my sedan 2 spots away from my father's luxury sports utility vehicle. Richard always insisted on driving expensive cars, even when the monthly payments suffocated their household budget. Appearances dictated every decision he made. I turned off my engine and took a slow, measured breath. The thick black binder of evidence sat safely locked in the trunk of my car. I did not bring it inside. Today was not the day for a confrontation. Today was a reconnaissance mission. I pushed the glass door open and stepped into the warm scent of roasted espresso and baked pastries. Richard sat in a corner booth. He wore a crisp blue button-down shirt and a tailored blazer. When he saw me, he stood up and offered a warm, practiced smile. He waved me over like we were old friends meeting for a casual chat. I slid into the leather booth across from him. A large caramel latte sat waiting on my side of the table. "I ordered your favorite," Richard said, his voice smooth and inviting. I stared at the paper cup. I stopped drinking caramel lattes when I was 19 years old. It was a minor detail, but it proved how little he actually knew about the woman sitting across from him. I did not correct him. I placed my hands in my lap and waited for the performance to begin. "Thank you for meeting me, Muskan," he started, leaning forward and resting his forearms on the table. He lowered his voice, adopting the tone of a tired, heartbroken patriarch. "I know the last week has been incredibly difficult. Your mother gets carried away. She is emotional about the wedding venue canceling. She said things she did not mean, and I failed to stop her. I am sorry." He sounded genuine. If I had not spent the entire previous night unearthing his federal loan fraud and the theft of my $75,000 inheritance, I might have believed him. Richard was always the good cop to Brenda's bad cop. Whenever my mother screamed and threw things, my father would swoop in hours later with a soft voice and a fake apology. It was a classic manipulation tactic designed to keep me off balance. "Apology accepted," I said. My voice betrayed zero emotion. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples, as if carrying the weight of the world. "We just want our family back together. Lexi is a wreck. Trent is stressed. The wedding is in jeopardy. But more importantly, I realized we have neglected you. We have taken your independence for granted. I want to make things right. I want to secure your future." I watched his eyes. Manipulators tend to maintain intense eye contact when they are trying to sell a lie. Richard stared directly into my pupils, unblinking. "How do you plan to do that?" I asked. Richard reached into his leather briefcase sitting on the bench beside him. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it carefully on the wooden table. He slid it across the surface until it rested right next to the caramel latte. "I had my attorney draft a consolidation agreement," Richard explained, tapping the top of the envelope. "We know you have worked hard. You live in a tiny condo. You deserve better. Your mother and I want to add your name to the deed of our house. We want to make you a co-owner of the family property. This document transfers 50% of the home equity directly to you. It is our way of apologizing and ensuring you have a solid financial foundation." He leaned back, crossing his arms, looking like a generous king bestowing a grand gift upon a humble peasant. I looked at the brown envelope. My father was offering me half of a large suburban home in a wealthy neighborhood. To an untrained eye, it looked like the ultimate peace offering. It looked like a father trying to make amends with a grand gesture of generational wealth. But I am a forensic accountant. I hunt financial predators for a living, and the predator sitting across from me was getting desperate. I opened the metal clasp and pulled out the stack of legal documents. The pages were printed on heavy, expensive paper. I ignored the cover letter and flipped straight to the dense paragraphs of legal jargon on page 3. My eyes scanned the text, bypassing the pleasantries and hunting for the operational clauses. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the trap. Right under a section labeled Transfer of Property Rights, there was a subsection titled Assumption of Attached Liabilities. I read the exact phrasing. By signing the document to accept the property deed, the recipient also agreed to assume full legal responsibility for any and all uncollateralized personal loans tied to the primary account holders. The document specifically listed a $50,000 personal loan originated on April 14th. My heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was not a gift. This was a financial execution. Richard knew the $50,000 loan he forged in my name was a ticking time bomb. He knew he could not keep making the minimum monthly payments because Trent's creditors were demanding cash. If the loan defaulted, the bank would start investigating. They would trace the IP address. They would discover the forged digital signature. Richard and Brenda would face federal prison. They needed a scapegoat. If I signed this beautiful, generous offer to co-own the family home, I would be legally ratifying that fraudulent loan. The assumption of liability clause meant I was stepping up and claiming the debt as my own. It would scrub my parents' fingerprints off the crime. They would be free and clear, and I would be on the hook for $50,000 of stolen money. Worse than that, Marcus had already told me my parents were defaulting on their mortgage. The house was weeks away from a sheriff's sale. The equity Richard was offering me did not even exist. He was handing me a burning building and asking me to pay the arsonist. I looked up from the paperwork. Richard was watching my face, waiting for me to cry tears of gratitude. He expected me to grab a pen and sign on the dotted line, desperate for his validation. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the trust fund Richard drained to buy Lexi a European vacation while I worked until my hands bled. "This is a very complex legal transfer," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "You are offering me a lot of responsibility here." "You can handle it," Richard smiled, his voice oozing with fake pride. "You are our smart girl. Just sign the back page and I will take it to the notary at the bank this afternoon. We can put all this ugliness behind us." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silver pen. He laid it on top of the contract. The bait was set. I picked up the pen. I held the cold metal between my fingers. Richard leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. He was inches away from escaping federal fraud charges. He was inches away from securing his perfect life at the cost of mine. I set the pen down on the table. "I really appreciate this gesture, Richard," I said, sliding the documents back into the manila envelope. "But as a rule, I never sign real estate contracts without having my own counsel review the terms. I will take this to my attorney this afternoon. We will go over the liability clauses together." The temperature in the booth plummeted. Richard's fake smile vanished. The muscles in his jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the envelope in my hands. The mask of the loving father shattered, revealing the panicked, cornered thief underneath. "That is not necessary," Richard said, his voice suddenly sharp and tight. "My lawyer already reviewed it. It is a standard family transfer. If you take it to an outside firm, they are just going to charge you unnecessary billable hours. Just sign it now, Muskan. Do not overcomplicate a simple gift." "I am an accountant," I replied, standing up and tucking the envelope firmly under my arm. "Overcomplicating financial documents is my job. If the transfer is standard, my attorney will agree. I will call you when we finish the review." Richard stood up. He reached across the table, his hand grasping for the envelope. "Give it back to me. If you do not trust me, then the offer is off the table." I stepped back, keeping the folder out of his reach. "A gift with an expiration date is just a trap," I said softly. He stared at me, his face pale. He knew I read the liability clause. He knew his plan had failed, but he did not realize how much danger he was actually in. He thought I was just being a cautious accountant. He had no idea I already possessed the IP logs, the transfer receipts, and the trust fund ledgers. He had no idea this document was the final nail in his coffin. "Thanks for the coffee," I said. I turned and walked out of the shop. I did not look back. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and tossed the manila envelope onto the passenger seat. This document proved intent. It proved my father knew the loan was fraudulent and actively tried to trick me into covering his tracks. Marcus was going to have a field day with this paperwork. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Richard thought he was setting a trap for a naive daughter, but tomorrow morning, I was taking this folder along with my thick black evidence binder directly to the branch manager of his bank. The fake olive branch had snapped. Now it was time to burn the entire tree down. The glass doors of the First National Credit Union slid open. Tuesday morning sunlight poured into the quiet lobby. I walked inside, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. Marcus walked beside me. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried a slim leather briefcase. I held the thick black binder pressed firmly against my side. We arrived 45 minutes before Richard and Brenda were scheduled to appear. I needed to control the battlefield before my parents even walked through the door. A receptionist directed us to the branch manager's office. Mr. Harrison was a balding man in his 50s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a cautious demeanor. He shook our hands and offered us a seat at his round mahogany conference table. He assumed we were there for a routine corporate audit. Marcus did not waste time with pleasantries. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the signed identity theft affidavit from the Federal Trade Commission. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus began, his voice calm but commanding, "we are here regarding a severe instance of wire fraud and identity theft processed through your institution. The perpetrators hold a joint checking account at this branch. They forged my client's signature to secure a $50,000 personal loan, then funneled the stolen capital into their own ledger." The branch manager stiffened. He pushed his glasses up his nose. Bank managers despise the word fraud. It means internal audits, federal compliance checks, and a mountain of unwanted paperwork. "Those are severe allegations," Mr. Harrison said. "We have rigorous security protocols for loan origination. I find it difficult to believe our system was compromised." I slid the black binder across the table. I opened it to the first tab. "Your system was not compromised by a hacker," I explained. "It was manipulated by account holders who had physical access to my identifying documents. Look at page 3. Mr. Harrison leaned forward. I guided him through the evidence. I showed him the fake email address. I pointed out the IP logs tying the digital signature directly to my parents' residential internet router. Then I showed him the wire transfer receipts proving the stolen $50,000 landed directly in Richard and Brenda's joint account before being dispersed to a car dealership and a travel agency. The color drained from Mr. Harrison's face. He traced the routing numbers with his index finger. The evidence was undeniable. His branch had facilitated a felony. "I need to contact our regional security officer," Mr. Harrison said, his voice dropping to an anxious whisper. "If these documents are authentic, we are required by federal law to freeze the receiving account immediately, pending a full criminal investigation." "You will have the opportunity to verify the documents in person very soon," Marcus replied, checking his silver wristwatch. "The account holders are scheduled to arrive here in 10 minutes. They believe they are meeting my client to sign a property transfer. I suggest we move this discussion to your main conference room." Mr. Harrison nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. 10 minutes later, I sat at a long glass table in the bank's main meeting room. Marcus sat to my right. Mr. Harrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by the branch's internal security director. Through the glass walls, I watched Richard and Brenda walk through the front doors. They looked triumphant. Brenda wore a pristine floral dress and a pearl necklace. Richard walked with his chest puffed out, holding the manila envelope containing the trap he tried to spring on me yesterday. They were smiling. They thought they had won. They believed I was a naive, obedient daughter who showed up with a lawyer just to rubber stamp their fake real estate gift. They expected to walk out of this building free from their debt, ready to fund Lexi's sham wedding. A teller escorted them into the conference room. Richard saw Marcus and extended his hand, flashing a charismatic grin. "Good morning. You must be Muskan's counsel. I am Richard. I assume you reviewed the consolidation agreement?" Marcus did not shake his hand. He gestured toward the empty chairs across the table. "Please, sit down." Brenda frowned, sensing the cold atmosphere. She smoothed her skirt and sat beside my father. She glanced at the bank manager, confused by his presence. "Is there a problem with the notary?" she asked. I rested my hands on the glass table. I did not raise my voice. I did not glare at them. I looked at the two people who raised me with the detached, analytical focus of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. "There is no notary, Brenda," I said, "and I am not signing the assumption of liability document you tried to disguise as a property deed." Richard's jaw tightened. "Muskan, do not be dramatic. We discussed this yesterday. It is a simple transfer." "It is a federal crime," Marcus interrupted, his deep voice echoing in the small room. "You attempted to coerce my client into claiming responsibility for a $50,000 loan you originated using a forged signature on April 14th. Richard turned pale. The charismatic smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer terror. He opened his mouth to deny it, but I pushed the open binder across the glass until it stopped inches from his hands. "I have the IP address logs, Richard," I said. "I know the electronic signature came from your living room router. I have the receipts showing you used the money to buy Trent a car and send Lexi to Mexico. I also have the ledgers proving you embezzled my $75,000 trust fund 20 years ago." Brenda gasped. Her hand flew to her chest. She stared at the pages in the binder, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Richard, waiting for him to spin a lie to fix the situation the way he always did. But Richard was paralyzed. The paper trail was flawless. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. He looked at my parents with pure institutional disgust. "Based on the evidence provided by this firm, First National Credit Union is initiating an immediate administrative freeze on all accounts bearing your names," Mr. Harrison announced. "This includes your joint checking, your primary savings, and your retirement portfolio. You are denied access to all capital effective this exact second. We are forwarding this file to the federal authorities for a formal wire fraud investigation." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Zero access to capital. Brenda's pristine facade crumbled instantly. She realized the gravity of the situation. Their accounts were frozen. The money was gone. They had no cash to pay the new wedding vendors. They had no money to pay Trent's dangerous private creditors. The secret dowry they promised him was trapped behind a federal investigation. "You cannot do this!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking. She slammed her hands flat on the glass table, glaring at the branch manager. "We have bills to pay. My daughter is getting married in 2 weeks. You cannot just steal our money." "It is not your money, ma'am," the security director stated flatly. Richard sat frozen, his eyes glued to the IP logs. The reality of prison time was settling over him like a suffocating blanket. I stood up and pushed my chair in. I picked up my black binder and tucked it under my arm. Marcus closed his briefcase and followed my lead. We had accomplished exactly what we came here to do. As I walked out of the conference room, Brenda scrambled out of her chair. She chased me through the open door, her heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. She caught up to me in the center of the main lobby, ignoring the stares of the bank tellers and customers. "Muskan, wait!" Brenda demanded, grabbing my elbow. I stopped and looked down at her hand until she slowly pulled it away. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. She tried to deploy her final weapon, the guilt trip. "Please," Brenda begged, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. "You are destroying us over a misunderstanding. Lexi needs that wedding. Trent needs that money. We are your parents. You cannot walk away and leave us with nothing. Family helps family." She stood in the middle of a crowded bank lobby, begging the daughter she abused to save her from the consequences of her own theft. I looked her directly in the eye. I felt zero pity. I felt zero obligation. I felt the profound freedom of a chain finally snapping. "Thieves aren't family," I said. I turned my back on her and walked through the sliding glass doors into the bright morning sun. Marcus walked beside me as we headed toward the parking lot. The crisp air felt amazing in my lungs. I had crippled their financial lifeline. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, scrambling to figure out how to satisfy Trent's creditors without a single dollar to their names. But as we reached my car, Marcus pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "Freezing their accounts was the necessary first step," Marcus said, handing me the paper. But when the branch manager pulled their portfolio to initiate the freeze, I noticed a separate alert on their profile. I did a quick public records search while you were talking. I unfolded the paper. It was a preliminary notice of default filed with the county clerk. "Your parents have missed 6 consecutive mortgage payments," Marcus explained. "The bank is not just freezing their checking account, they are preparing to foreclose on the house." I stared at the notice. The family home, the fortress where they raised Lexi to be a princess and treated me like a servant, was slipping through their fingers. The pieces for my final strike were falling perfectly into place. I stared at the preliminary notice of default Marcus handed me in the bank parking lot. The county clerk seal stamped across the top right corner caught the morning sunlight. 6 missed payments. I read the dates listed on the formal document. My parents stopped paying their mortgage in November. They are functionally bankrupt, Marcus said, leaning against the door of his vehicle. The bank initiated the foreclosure process 3 weeks ago. A sheriff's sale is scheduled for the end of next month. That is why they were so eager to get your signature on the assumption of liability contract. They needed you to take the fall for the forged debt, but they also needed a scapegoat when they lost the property. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my purse. The revelation painted a pathetic picture of their hidden reality. Richard and Brenda projected an image of flawless suburban success. They hosted neighborhood barbecues. They bragged about Lexi attending expensive prep schools. They drove leased luxury vehicles. Behind closed doors, their financial foundation was crumbling into dust. They funneled every spare dollar into maintaining a grand illusion. When Trent entered the picture with his mountain of private debt, my parents drained their last remaining lifeline to keep him around. They stopped paying for the roof over their heads to buy Lexi a husband. Who holds the primary note on the property? I asked Marcus. A mid-size regional lender based in Denver, he replied. They specialize in high-risk residential portfolios. Right now, that note is classified as distressed debt on their ledger. Banks hate distressed debt. It ruins their quarterly reports. A sudden, sharp idea formed in my mind. It was a ruthless strategy, something I usually reserve for hostile corporate takeovers. If the debt is distressed, the lender will want to offload it quickly before the sheriff's sale, I said, looking up at Marcus. They will sell the promissory note for pennies on the dollar to a private buyer just to clear their books. Marcus raised an eyebrow. A slow smile spread across his face. Are you thinking about purchasing your parents' defaulted mortgage? I am thinking about becoming their landlord, I corrected him. I thanked Marcus for his work and drove straight back to my office. I did not go to my cubicle. I walked directly to the senior partner suite and knocked on Diane's door. She told me to come inside. Did you lock down your credit? Diane asked, looking up from her dual monitors. I did, I said, taking a seat across from her desk. I also confronted them at the bank. Their accounts are frozen pending a federal fraud investigation, but I found a new piece of leverage and I need access to a private equity contact. I laid out the entire situation. I explained the defaulted mortgage, the impending foreclosure, and my strategy to purchase the distressed note. I had significant savings, but buying a residential mortgage outright required liquid capital I could not access in 48 hours. Diane listened in silence. She leaned back in her leather chair, tapping her gold pen against her desk pad. She understood the mechanics of revenge better than anyone. You want to buy the debt and hold the lien, Diane summarized. That gives you total control over the property. You can evict them legally. You can sell the house out from under them. I want to take the one thing they value more than their own children, I said. Their status. Diane picked up her desk phone. I have a client named Gregory. He runs a boutique real estate investment trust here in Colorado. We saved him from a terrible embezzlement scandal 3 years ago. He owes me a favor and he loves punishing fraudsters. I will set up a meeting for you this afternoon. At 2 o'clock, I walked into Gregory's office on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise. He was a retired commercial developer in his late 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I sat across from him and presented my proposal like a business pitch. I did not ask for a handout. I offered a joint venture. The property is located in a highly desirable school district, I explained, sliding the neighborhood comparables across his desk. The current market value is $800,000. The outstanding defaulted debt is only $400,000. I will put down my entire life savings of $100,000 right now. I need your firm to front the remaining $300,000 to purchase the note from the regional lender. Gregory studied the documents. What is the return on my investment? When I seize the property and flip it next month, you get your initial capital back, plus a 20% premium, I promised. It is a guaranteed return, secured by premium residential real estate. He looked at my face, searching for any sign of hesitation. He found none. Gregory picked up a heavy fountain pen and signed the preliminary term sheet. My legal team will contact the regional lender today, Gregory said. We will execute a quiet purchase. Your parents will not receive any notification until the deed transfer is finalized in the county records. Over the next 4 days, I worked my regular shifts, while the legal machinery operated in the shadows. The regional bank jumped at the chance to sell the bad debt. They drafted the assignment of mortgage. I wired my entire life savings into the escrow account. Every dollar I earned from working late nights, every vacation I skipped, every cheap meal I ate, went into that wire transfer. I was gambling my entire financial safety net on this move. I felt zero fear. On Friday morning, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my desk. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the finalized legal documents. The state seal gleamed in the fluorescent office light. The promissory note was officially reassigned. I was now the primary lien holder of my parents' home. I owned the roof over the heads of the people who kicked me out. They were sleeping in my bedrooms. They were cooking in my kitchen. The ultimate trump card sat safely in my desk drawer, ready to be played at the exact moment it would cause maximum devastation. While I secured their financial ruin, my parents were scrambling in the dark. With their bank accounts frozen and their credit destroyed by the fraud investigation, their world was collapsing. They had no cash to pay the luxury Aspen vendors. They had no way to fund Trent's secret dowry. A rational family would have canceled the wedding, admitted defeat, and hired a criminal defense attorney to prepare for the fallout of the forged loan. But Richard and Brenda were incapable of admitting failure. Their pride was a fatal disease. They needed to keep Trent from walking away, so they decided to double down on the illusion. Saturday afternoon, I checked my mailbox in the lobby of my condominium building. Nestled between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer was a square, cream-colored envelope. The return address belonged to my sister Lexi. I opened the flap and pulled out a single piece of cheap cardstock. It was a wedding invitation. The luxury mountain resort was gone. The new location was a run-down banquet hall situated behind a bowling alley on the outskirts of town. The extravagant filet mignon dinner was replaced by a generic afternoon buffet. They rebooked a cheap venue using high-interest emergency credit cards, desperately trying to keep the ceremony alive. At the bottom of the invitation, Lexi had written a personal note in blue ink. "We do not need your money to be happy. True family finds a way. See you at the altar." I stared at the smug handwriting. Lexi truly believed they outsmarted me. She thought she was proving my irrelevance by marching forward with this pathetic backup plan. She had no idea her fiancé was a grifter planning to flee. She had no idea her parents were facing federal indictment. She had no idea her childhood home belonged to the sister she despised. They wanted me to attend their desperate spectacle. They wanted me to sit in the back row and watch them celebrate their fake victory. I walked upstairs, unlocked my front door, and walked straight to my home office. I pulled a pristine sheet of stationery from my desk drawer. I uncapped my pen and checked the RSVP box, marked yes. I was going to that wedding. I would wear a beautiful dress. I would sit in the pews with their judgmental church friends and gossiping neighbors, but I was not bringing a toaster or a set of fine china. I was bringing the pawn shop receipts. I was bringing the wire fraud evidence. I was bringing the eviction notice. My phone vibrated on the desk. A text message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "Keep your mouth shut tomorrow night, or else." I recognized the underlying threat instantly. Trent was getting nervous. He knew I possessed his pawn ticket from the police encounter. He knew his payday was slipping away. He wanted to corner me before the ceremony to ensure his secret stayed buried. I locked my phone and dropped the RSVP card into my outgoing mail slot. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for tomorrow evening. Trent wanted a fight. I was more than happy to oblige. The frozen bank accounts sent my parents into a tailspin. With Mr. Harrison locking down their cash, Brenda lost her primary weapon. She could no longer buy her way out of a problem. But a narcissist facing public humiliation will always find a darker path. Since she could not access her checking account, my mother turned to predatory lending. She opened 3 high-interest emergency credit cards under her maiden name. She maxed them out within 48 hours. She did not use the funds to hire a criminal defense attorney to fight her impending federal fraud charges. She used the borrowed plastic to rent a dilapidated banquet hall located behind a suburban bowling alley. I drove past the location on my way home from work just to see it. The neon sign out front flickered in the dusk. The parking lot smelled of stale beer and hot asphalt. This was the grand stage Lexi secured for her dream day. The contrast between the luxury Aspen Mountain Resort and this dingy concrete box was jarring. But Lexi preferred a cheap illusion over facing reality. She needed the wedding photos for her social media pages. She needed the validation of standing in a white dress, even if the floor beneath her feet was covered in cheap linoleum. Trent hated the downgrade. I knew this because I still monitored his public social media profiles. He posted a cryptic complaint about settling for less. Trent viewed himself as a high roller. Standing inside a budget event hall damaged his fragile ego. He owed dangerous private creditors over $100,000. He needed a giant cash payout, not a discount buffet. So why did he stay? Why did the grifter not pack his bags and vanish when the Aspen venue fell through? The answer lived in Richard's delusion. My father knew he was trapped. He knew I possessed the internet logs proving he forged my signature. He knew the bank froze his assets. Yet Richard maintained his fabricated reality. He likely pulled Trent aside and spun a story about temporary tax audits. Richard probably promised the young con artist that the dowry was safe, wrapped up in secure investments, ready to be liquidated the moment the marriage certificate gained a county clerk's stamp. Trent stuck around because he had no other viable escape route. His creditors were closing in. He decided to gamble his physical safety on Richard's empty promise. They were two desperate men lying to each other, bound together by mutual greed. That mutual greed birthed the smug invitation I received in my mailbox. The cheap cardstock felt rough against my fingertips. Lexi chose a gaudy gold font that flaked off when I rubbed it. The handwritten note at the bottom was a final attempt to assert dominance. She wrote that true family finds a way. She claimed they did not need my money to be happy. It was a pathetic display of arrogance. My sister thought my silence meant I was defeated. She assumed I was sitting in my condo consumed by regret, wishing I had just paid the $40,000 catering invoice to keep my place at the Sunday dinner table. Brenda probably told her church friends that I begged for an invitation and they graciously allowed me to attend. They wanted me to witness their triumph. They wanted me to watch Lexi marry her Prince Charming while I sat alone in the back row. I logged on to the cheap wedding website listed on the card. I navigated to the attendance section. I typed my name into the guest list form. I checked the box confirming my arrival. I did not request a +1. I did not select a meal preference. I simply confirmed that I would be in the room. Then I went to work on my gifts. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in emotion. I deal in documented facts. I drove to a premium office supply store and purchased 4 thick presentation portfolios. I chose black leather bindings with silver clasps. They looked identical to the folders executives used to deliver corporate acquisition terms. I returned to my home office and laid the 4 empty portfolios across my glass desk. I opened my master evidence binder and began sorting the devastation into precise categories. The first portfolio was for Lexi. She built her entire identity around being the chosen daughter, the girl who secured a wealthy entrepreneur. Inside her folder, I placed the state pawn shop registry receipt. The document clearly showed Trent selling her engagement ring for $2,000 just days after she reported it stolen. I included his signature and the copy of his driver's license. This single page proved her groom was a broke thief who lied to her face. The second portfolio was for the federal authorities, but Richard needed to see a preview. Inside this folder, I arranged the loan origination documents. I highlighted the forged electronic signature. I attached the internet protocol logs proving the fraud originated from their living room router. I added the bank transfer receipts showing the stolen $50,000 landing in their joint account. This folder was a one-way ticket to federal prison. The third portfolio addressed the deepest wound. It was the historical ledger of my grandfather's trust fund. I printed the original trust mandate showing my name as the sole beneficiary of $75,000. Behind it, I attached the agonizing list of withdrawals Richard made to fund Lexi's European vacations and private school tuition. This folder stripped away the illusion that Richard was a hard-working provider. It exposed him as a common embezzler who robbed his eldest child. The fourth and final portfolio was my masterpiece. It contained the county clerk records and the reassigned promissory note. This document proved I purchased their defaulted mortgage from the regional lender. It proved I was the primary lien holder of their suburban fortress. It included a formal 30-day eviction notice drafted by Marcus, ready to be handed to my father. I closed each portfolio and snapped the silver clasps shut. 4 neat packages, 4 undeniable truths. My parents thought I was attending their party to grovel. They expected me to hand over a crisp check in a greeting card, hoping to buy back their love. They had no idea I was bringing the financial equivalent of a wrecking ball. I stacked the black folders on my entryway table. I walked into my bedroom to select my outfit. Brenda always demanded I wear muted colors to family events. She insisted I blend into the background so Lexi could shine. Pastels, beige, gray, those were the colors of a compliant daughter. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a tailored, vibrant crimson dress. It was sharp, professional, and impossible to ignore. I paired it with black stiletto heels. I was not going to blend in. I was going to stand out. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. I picked it up and read the threat Trent sent from his unknown number earlier that afternoon. "Keep your mouth shut tomorrow night, or else." The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for the following evening. Trent knew I held his pawn ticket. He knew I possessed the power to blow up his payday before he even reached the altar. He wanted to intimidate me in a dark corner of an Italian restaurant. He thought he could bully a woman into submission because his physical presence was the only leverage he had left. He was a desperate man backed into a corner by his own bad debts. He was dangerous, but he made a critical miscalculation. He assumed I was afraid of conflict. He assumed I would cower if he raised his voice. He did not realize I already owned the ground he was standing on. I deleted his text message and plugged my phone into the charger. I slept a full 8 hours that night. My conscience was clear. The trap was set. Tomorrow I would walk into that rehearsal dinner and give Trent exactly 2 choices: run away or face the police. The countdown to the wedding had begun, and the first domino was about to fall. The neon sign outside the Villa Roma Italian restaurant buzzed in the evening air. It was a modest establishment located in a strip mall famous for heavy garlic bread and cheap house wine. This was the location Brenda chose for the rehearsal dinner. Before the bank manager froze their accounts, my mother had bragged about hosting this event at a 5-star steakhouse downtown. Now she was forced to settle for a back room that smelled of scorched tomato sauce and old carpet. I parked my car and walked toward the entrance. I wore the vibrant crimson dress and black stiletto heels. I knew Brenda wanted me to show up looking defeated, wearing some dull gray outfit, silently begging for her forgiveness. Instead, I arrived looking like a woman who owned the building. I pulled the heavy glass door open and gave my name to the teenage hostess. She grabbed a stack of menus and led me toward the private dining area in the back. My family sat at a long, rectangular table covered in a faded red checkered cloth. There were only 12 guests. Lexi sat at the center wearing a white cocktail dress, forcing a wide smile for the digital camera a bridesmaid held in the air. Trent sat next to her, staring down at his phone. Richard and Brenda sat directly across from them. When I stepped into the room, the forced laughter stopped. Brenda looked at my red dress and her jaw tightened so hard I thought her teeth might crack. She hated when anyone pulled attention away from Lexi. Richard looked pale. He gripped his water glass, his knuckles turning white. He knew I held the power to send him to federal prison, and he had no idea what I was planning to do tonight. "Muskan," Lexi said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You actually came. I thought you would be too busy counting your pennies at home." A few of the bridesmaids giggled. They thought Lexi was the victim. They bought into the narrative Brenda spun on social media. "I would never miss this," I said. I pulled out an empty chair at the far end of the table and sat down. I placed my black leather purse on my lap. The dinner service began. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I watched my parents closely. Richard usually dominated a room, ordering expensive bottles of wine and acting like a generous benefactor. Tonight, he ordered tap water. When the waiter asked about appetizers, Brenda quickly intervened, claiming they all needed to eat light to fit into their wedding attire tomorrow. I knew the truth. Brenda was paying for this meal with one of her new emergency credit cards. Every plate of pasta was plunging them deeper into high-interest debt. To test my theory, I signaled the waiter. "I will have the ribeye steak," I told the young man, "medium rare, and a glass of your best Cabernet." Brenda shot me a lethal glare from across the table. She was footing the bill, and I just ordered the most expensive item on the menu. I offered her a polite, quiet smile. Throughout the meal, Trent did not say a single word to me. He drank 3 glasses of cheap beer in rapid succession. He kept checking his watch. His leg bounced up and down beneath the table. He was a man running out of time. His dangerous private creditors were expecting a massive payout, and he was banking on a dowry that Richard could no longer provide. Trent was trapped in a financial pressure cooker, and he thought I was the only person standing in his way. I finished my steak, dabbed my mouth with a linen napkin, and stood up. I picked up my purse. "Excuse me," I announced to the table. "I need to use the restroom." I walked out of the private dining area and turned down a narrow, dimly lit hallway located near the kitchen doors. The corridor was empty. The music from the main dining room faded away, replaced by the hum of an industrial refrigerator. I did not have to wait long. 10 seconds later, heavy footsteps echoed behind me. A hand reached out and grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. It was Trent. His charismatic, polished mask was entirely gone. His face was red, his eyes were wide and frantic. He smelled like stale beer and cheap cologne. He stepped forward, using his height to trap me against the textured wallpaper of the hallway. "Listen to me very carefully," Trent hissed, pointing a finger inches from my face. "I sent you a text message yesterday. I told you to keep your mouth shut. You think you are so smart showing up here in that red dress? You think you can intimidate me?" I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at his shaking finger with profound boredom. "Are you threatening me, Trent?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "I am giving you a warning," he sneered. "I know you are trying to ruin my payday. You refused to pay for the Aspen resort. You caused all this drama with your parents. Tomorrow is my wedding day. If you say one word to derail this ceremony, if you try to stop Richard from handing me my house deposit check, I will make your life a living hell. I know where you work. I know where you live." He thought physical intimidation would break my focus. He thought standing close to me and raising his voice would reduce me to tears. He underestimated who he was dealing with. I reached into my black purse and pulled out my cell phone. "Your payday," I repeated. "That is an interesting word choice for a groom." "Put the phone away," Trent ordered, his voice dropping an octave. "I am an auditor, Trent," I said, tapping the screen to unlock my device. "When I investigate a subject, I pull everything. I do not just look at bank statements. I pull public civil court records. I look at collection agency filings. A few days ago, one of your private creditors filed a motion for default judgment against you in the county court. To prove you owed them money, they entered a voicemail you left them into the public evidence record." Trent froze. The angry red color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking pale and sick. "I requested a digital copy of that public exhibit," I explained. I opened my audio files, pressed play, and held the phone up between us. Trent's own frantic voice echoed in the narrow hallway. "Look, Vince, just give me 8 more days," the recorded voice pleaded. "I swear to you I will have the cash. The old man is writing $100,000 check for a house deposit the second the marriage certificate is signed. I will deposit the funds on Monday, drain the joint accounts on Tuesday, dump the girl, and drive straight to Reno. You will get every dime I owe you. Just call your guys off." I pressed pause. The silence in the corridor was deafening. Trent stared at the glowing screen of my phone. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. "You never planned to stay married to my sister," I said, putting the phone back into my purse. "You planned to take the dowry steal, whatever Lexi had in her savings, and flee the state to pay off your loan sharks." "You do not understand," Trent stammered, stepping back. His aggressive posture collapsed. He suddenly looked like a terrified little boy. "Those guys, they are going to hurt me if I do not pay them." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "But here is the detail you are missing. Richard does not have $100,000. His bank accounts are frozen pending a federal wire fraud investigation. He is bankrupt. The house deposit he promised you does not exist. You are marrying into a family that is just as broke and desperate as you are." Trent leaned against the wall, running his hands through his hair. His breathing grew more ragged as the reality of his situation crushed him. There was no payout. There was no escape route. I am going to give you two choices, I told him, stepping forward to close the distance between us. I wanted him to hear every single syllable clearly. Choice 1. You walk out the back door of this restaurant right now. You send Lexi a text message calling off the wedding. You get in your leased car, you drive away, and you never contact my family again. Trent swallowed hard. And choice 2? Choice 2, I said, my voice turning to ice. You show up at that altar tomorrow. If you do, I will hand a local police detective the state pawnshop registry ticket you signed 3 days ago. The ticket proving you stole and fenced my sister's $15,000 engagement ring. You will be arrested at your own reception for a felony. I watched his eyes dart back and forth as he processed the ultimatum. He was cornered. If he stayed, he got no money and went to prison for theft. If he ran, he had to face his creditors empty-handed, but he would keep his freedom. You have until midnight to make your decision, I said. I turned around and walked back down the hallway, leaving him sweating in the dim light. I returned to the private dining room and sat back down in my chair. Brenda glared at me. Lexi continued laughing with her friends. Richard stared at his empty water glass. 10 minutes later, the back door of the restaurant chimed. Trent never returned to the table. I took a slow sip of my expensive Cabernet. The trap was set. The options were laid out, and I felt a profound sense of peace. I did not know which path Trent would choose, but it did not matter. Tomorrow was the wedding day. I had 4 black leather portfolios sitting on my entryway table at home. Whatever happened at that altar, I was ready to deliver the final crushing blow to the family that threw me away. I pulled my sedan into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the suburban banquet hall. The afternoon sun beat down on the flat roof of the building. A cheap banner hung over the entrance. I gathered the 4 black leather portfolios from my passenger seat. They felt heavy in my hands, loaded with documented justice. I smoothed the fabric of my crimson dress, locked the car, and walked through the double glass doors. The lobby smelled of stale carpet and industrial cleaning supplies. Brenda had tried to mask the dingy venue by draping yards of thin white tulle over the harsh fluorescent light fixtures. Row after row of folding chairs filled the main room. I walked down the center aisle. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the seated crowd. The women from Brenda's church group stared at my bright dress, their eyes judging my defiance. I ignored their glares. I chose a seat in the 3rd row, placing the 4 binders neatly on my lap. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3 o'clock. By 3:30, the string quartet playing in the corner looked exhausted. Lexi stood near the makeshift altar, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She wore a voluminous white gown that looked entirely out of place against the peeling wallpaper. Her heavy makeup was beginning to shine with nervous sweat. Richard paced near the side exit, his phone glued to his ear. He looked frantic. Brenda darted between the aisles, leaning down to whisper to the guests, deploying her signature fake smile. She was likely telling everyone there was a minor wardrobe malfunction. At 3:45, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall swung open with a loud bang. Lexi's maid of honor rushed down the aisle. Her face was flushed red and she was hyperventilating. She ignored the crowd and ran straight to Brenda. The young woman spoke in a panicked, carrying whisper. She said the gift table in the lobby was destroyed. Someone had taken a heavy metal centerpiece and smashed the locked acrylic wedding card box. Every single envelope containing cash or checks was gone, and Trent was missing. His groomsman said he stepped out to grab a mint from his car 20 minutes ago and never returned. I sat perfectly still. Trent had made his choice. He knew his secret dowry was trapped behind a federal bank freeze. He knew I held the pawnshop evidence that would send him to prison. So he executed his backup plan. He robbed the wedding guests to secure a travel fund and vanished into the wind. Pandemonium erupted near the altar. Lexi dropped her bouquet. The flowers scattered across the scuffed linoleum floor. She let out a loud, piercing sob, covering her face with her hands. Richard stared at the wall, his jaw slack, the reality of his ruined reputation finally setting in. But Brenda refused to surrender to the truth. My mother rushed over to the small podium where the hired officiant stood. She grabbed the microphone. Feedback squealed through the cheap speakers, forcing the guests to cover their ears. "Attention, everyone. Brenda announced, her voice trembling but loud. "Please remain calm. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. Trent suffered a sudden medical emergency outside. He had to be rushed to the local hospital. Someone broke into our gift box during the commotion. Please bow your heads and pray for my son-in-law." It was a brilliant, desperate lie. She wanted the crowd to feel sympathy. She wanted to remain the tragic hero of her own fabricated story. I did not let her. I stood up. My stiletto heels clicked sharply against the hard floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. I stepped out of the pew and walked straight down the center aisle, holding my stack of black portfolios. Every eye in the building tracked my movement. Mrs. Higgins, the head of the church bake sale, gasped audibly. Aunt Susan leaned forward in her chair, her brow furrowed in confusion. I stopped 3 feet from the altar. I did not need a microphone. "There is no medical emergency," I said, projecting my voice so every person in the back row heard me clearly. "Trent is not at the hospital. He is currently driving toward the state border with your stolen cash." Brenda dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud. "Shut your mouth, Muskan," she hissed, her eyes wild. "Get out of here. You have ruined enough." I ignored her. I turned to Lexi. My sister was weeping, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark streaks. I unclasped the first black portfolio and handed it to her. "Look at the first page, Lexi," I instructed softly. Lexi took the folder with trembling hands. She looked down at the state pawnshop registry receipt. "Trent did not flee because he is sick," I told the silent room. "He fled because he is a broke con artist, running from dangerous private creditors. 3 days ago, he walked into a pawn shop in Denver and sold your engagement ring for $2,000. That is his signature on the receipt. He planned to take a $100,000 dowry from our father today. When he found out the money did not exist, he robbed your gift box and abandoned you." The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs. Lexi stared at the pawn ticket, her chest heaving, unable to deny the physical proof of her groom's betrayal. Brenda lunged forward, trying to snatch the folder from Lexi's hands. "She forged that!" Brenda screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is a bitter, jealous spinster. She fabricated this entire thing to destroy us." I opened the second portfolio. I turned to the audience, holding up the dense legal documents for the church congregation to see. "I did not fabricate anything," I said, my voice cutting through Brenda's hysteria. "My parents promised Trent $100,000 because they were desperate to buy Lexi a husband. But they are bankrupt. To fund this wedding, Richard and Brenda committed federal wire fraud." I pulled out the internet protocol logs and the bank transfer receipts. "6 months ago, they stole my identity," I continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. "They forged my electronic signature to secure a $50,000 personal loan. They funneled the cash into their joint checking account. They used my credit score to buy Trent a car and send Lexi to Mexico. I reported the theft. As of Tuesday morning, the bank froze every asset my parents own. They are currently under investigation by federal authorities." Aunt Susan let out a sharp cry. The older women in the front row clamped their hands over their mouths. The pristine, flawless image Brenda had spent 2 decades cultivating shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. The neighbors who praised her parenting now looked at her with profound disgust. Richard finally moved. He stepped toward me, his face twisted in rage. "That is enough, Muskan. You have made your point. Leave." "I am not finished," I said. I opened the third portfolio, the heaviest one. I pulled out the historical ledger from my grandfather's trust fund. I held the pages up, ensuring my father saw the familiar stationery. 20 years ago, my grandfather William passed away," I told the crowd, locking eyes with Richard. "He left a $75,000 trust fund specifically designated for my college education. He made Richard the executor." I turned to face the congregation. "My father embezzled every single dollar," I declared. "While I worked 3 jobs and drowned in student debt, Richard drained my inheritance. He used my money to pay for Lexi's private high school. He used my money to send his wife on European vacations. He robbed his own child to bankroll a fantasy lifestyle for his favorite daughter." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one whispered. No one moved. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal paralyzed the room. The church friends who had blown up my phone with hateful voicemails just days ago now stared at the floor, burning with shame. They realized they had aligned themselves with monsters. Brenda stood frozen near the podium. Her shoulders slumped. The arrogant matriarch was gone, replaced by a terrified fraudster exposed in front of her entire community. Lexi sat on the floor in her white gown, clutching the pawn ticket, sobbing uncontrollably. Richard looked like a man standing on the gallows watching the lever pull back. The destruction of their social standing was complete. They had nothing left to hide behind. The lies were dead. I closed the third portfolio. I looked at the three of them, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. The scales of justice were finally balanced. But I still held the fourth black folder in my left hand. The most devastating consequence was yet to come. Richard glared at me, his fists clenched, ordering me to exit the building. He thought the public humiliation was the final strike. He had no idea I was about to take the very ground beneath his feet. Richard stood near the podium, his face flushed a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. The exposure of his trust fund embezzlement stripped away his polished exterior, leaving only raw, unfiltered rage. He could not dispute the bank ledgers. He could not argue with the dates and amounts I had just displayed to his entire social circle. Denied any logical defense, my father resorted to the only tactic he had left. He tried to reclaim his authority through intimidation. He raised a shaking hand and pointed a stiff finger toward the double glass doors at the back of the banquet hall. "Get out," Richard ordered, his voice echoing off the cheap linoleum floor. "Get out of this building right now. You are dead to us. Do not ever call us again, and do not ever step foot inside our home. You are banned from our property." I looked at his outstretched arm. I listened to his desperate attempt to banish me from his kingdom. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was the exact sentence I had been waiting for since I walked down the aisle. He invoked the house as his ultimate shield, assuming it was the one fortress where he still held absolute power. I looked down at the fourth black leather portfolio resting in my left hand. I ran my thumb over the silver clasp. "Your home," I repeated softly. The words hung in the suffocating silence of the room. Every guest held their breath waiting for my next move. I unclasped the final folder. The sharp snap of the metal fastener cut through the quiet air. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. The state seal of Colorado was stamped in bright blue ink on the top page. I walked directly up to Richard. I stopped less than 2 feet away from him, invading his personal space. He tried to stand tall, but his eyes darted nervously to the paperwork in my hands. "You project a very convincing image of wealth, Richard," I said, projecting my voice so the women from the church group in the front row heard every single syllable. "You drive leased luxury cars, you host expensive holiday parties, you judge everyone else for their financial struggles, but the truth is, you are drowning." I held up the first document for the audience to see. 6 months, I announced. That is how long you and Brenda have gone without paying the mortgage on your suburban fortress. You stopped paying for the roof over your head back in November. You funneled every spare cent you had into funding Lexi's lavish lifestyle and Trent's secret dowry. The bank filed a notice of default 3 weeks ago. Your property was scheduled for a sheriff's sale at the end of next month. Richard lowered his pointing finger. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He knew about the default, but he never expected his darkest secret to be broadcasted in front of the very neighbors he spent 2 decades trying to impress. "Distressed debt is a liability for a bank," I explained, shifting my gaze from the crowd back to my father. "Lenders hate keeping bad residential loans on their books. They prefer to sell those toxic assets to private investors to recoup their losses." I handed the thick stack of watermarked paper directly to Richard. His hands trembled as he took the documents. He looked down at the front page. His eyes scanned the dense legal text tracing the bold black ink. "I took my life savings," I told him, my voice dropping to a sharp, clinical tone. "The money you demanded I give to you for this wedding. I partnered with a private commercial developer from my accounting firm. 3 days ago, my investor and I wired $400,000 to your regional lender. We purchased your defaulted promissory note outright." Richard stopped reading. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it almost looked like physical pain. "You do not own that house anymore, Richard," I stated, delivering the final blow. "I own the debt. I am the primary lien holder. The deed transfer was finalized by the county clerk yesterday morning." A collective gasp echoed from the church pews. Aunt Susan dropped her purse on the floor, the contents spilling across the linoleum, but she did not even look down to retrieve it. Mrs. Higgins sat frozen, staring at my parents, as if they were strangers wearing stolen clothes. Brenda pushed past the podium and grabbed Richard's arm. She leaned over to look at the paperwork. She traced the new ownership clause with her manicured finger. She saw my name listed as the sole proprietor of the debt. "No," Brenda whispered, shaking her head rapidly. "No, you cannot do this. We have equity. We have lived there for 20 years. You cannot just take it." "You have zero equity," I corrected her, tapping the second page of the document Richard was holding. "Read the attached civil claim. The property is being seized and liquidated to satisfy two distinct debts. First, the $75,000 you embezzled from my grandfather's trust fund. Second, the damages and legal fees resulting from the $50,000 loan you fraudulently opened using my forged signature. By the time the courts finish unwinding your crimes, you will not receive a single cent from the sale." Brenda let out a high-pitched, keening wail. It was the sound of a woman watching her entire curated universe collapse into dust. She lunged forward, reaching out with both hands to grab my arm. She wanted to physically shake me to force me to reverse the nightmare. I stepped backward, avoiding her grasp. I looked down at her hands, then looked up at her face with the same detached disgust one might reserve for a stain on a kitchen countertop. "Do not touch me," I warned, my tone laced with ice. Behind them, Lexi finally broke. The spoiled golden child realized her safety net was entirely gone. She had no groom, she had no wedding, and now she had no childhood bedroom to run back to. Lexi collapsed onto the steps of the makeshift altar. Her voluminous white gown pooled around her on the dirty floor. She buried her face in her knees and sobbed, a loud, ugly sound that filled the stagnant air of the banquet hall. Richard remained speechless. The man who always had a lecture prepared, the man who always knew how to manipulate the narrative, stood paralyzed. He stared at the court-approved paperwork in his trembling hands. "Turn to the last page," I instructed him. He swallowed hard and flipped the thick pages over. The final sheet of paper featured a bright red stamp from the local housing authority. "That is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I told him. "You have 1 month to pack your belongings and vacate the premises. If you are still inside the house on day 31, the county sheriff will arrive to physically remove you and change the locks." I took a slow, deep breath. The weight I had carried since I was a little girl, the burden of never being good enough, of always being the secondary child, vanished entirely. "You sat at a dinner table 5 days ago and told me to pay for this wedding, or I was no daughter of yours," I said, holding Richard's terrified gaze. "I took your advice. I guess I am just the landlord now." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Lexi's sobbing quieted into soft, ragged hiccups. I turned my back on my family and faced the crowd. The wedding guests were already moving. Aunt Susan stood up, gathered her spilled belongings, and walked briskly toward the side exit without saying a word to Brenda. The church ladies followed suit. They grabbed their coats and purses, keeping their heads down, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of my parents' crimes. The mass exodus of their social circle had begun. By tomorrow morning, the entire town would know that the pristine suburban family was actually a syndicate of broke, desperate fraudsters. I walked up the center aisle, my stiletto heels clicking a steady rhythm against the floor. I did not look back. I did not care what they did next. I pushed the heavy double-glass doors open and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The heat felt wonderful against my skin. I walked to my sedan, tossed my empty purse onto the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel. I had dismantled the people who tried to destroy me. I had secured my inheritance and stripped them of their most prized possession. But as I pulled out of the cracked asphalt parking lot, I realized this victory was only the beginning. I was now the owner of a sprawling suburban estate, and I had $75,000 in stolen trust funds to recover. The war was over, but the work of building a new foundation was just about to start. The clock started ticking the moment I walked out of that suburban banquet hall. 30 days. That was the legal grace period my father had to empty the 4-bedroom house he could no longer afford. Richard and Brenda returned from the ruined wedding to find their world irrevocably shattered. The illusion they spent 2 decades carefully building had evaporated in a single afternoon. They had no cash, no credit, and no allies left to manipulate. Federal prosecutors did not waste any time. The morning after the disastrous ceremony, agents visited the First National Credit Union to review the evidence Marcus provided. The paper trail was pristine. The Internet protocol logs, the wire transfer receipts, and the forged electronic signature formed an airtight case. 3 days later, Richard was formally indicted on charges of wire fraud and identity theft. Because Mr. Harrison maintained the administrative freeze on all their accounts, my father could not afford a private defense attorney. The man who prided himself on wearing tailored suits and sipping expensive scotch was forced to rely on an overworked public defender. Faced with a mountain of undeniable proof, Richard took a plea deal. He avoided a lengthy trial, but could not escape the consequences. A federal judge sentenced him to 36 months in a minimum security correctional facility, followed by 5 years of strict probation. Furthermore, the court mandated severe financial restitution. Any future income Richard managed to earn would be immediately garnished to repay the $50,000 loan he fraudulently originated, plus the penalties accrued by the lender. He was a convicted felon. His pristine reputation was permanently erased. Brenda suffered a different kind of prison. Her punishment was entirely social, which, for a narcissist, was far worse than a jail cell. She tried to salvage her standing in the community. She called Mrs. Higgins, hoping to spin a new web of lies, but the call went straight to a disconnected tone. Aunt Susan blocked her number and returned every piece of mail unopened. The church congregation voted to remove Brenda from the neighborhood council. When she walked down the grocery store aisles, women who used to invite her to lunch turned their shopping carts around and walked the other way. She was a pariah. On day 31, the eviction notice matured. I did not attend the final lockout, but Marcus sent an associate to observe the proceedings and ensure the property was secured. The county sheriff arrived at 8 in the morning with a locksmith. Richard and Brenda had no money to hire professional movers. They spent their final hours stuffing their clothes and cheap knickknacks into black plastic garbage bags. The associate reported that Brenda stood on the front lawn weeping loudly, expecting a neighbor to rush over and offer sympathy. No one came out of their houses. The street remained entirely quiet. The sheriff handed them a copy of the finalized property seizure, and my parents drove away in a rusted sedan Brenda borrowed from a distant cousin. They moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of town. The unit sat above a noisy commercial laundromat. The windows rattled every time a delivery truck drove past. Brenda, who once hosted lavish country club dinners, now spent her evenings clipping coupons and staring at peeling wallpaper. Richard awaited his surrender date for the federal facility, sitting in a cheap recliner surrounded by cardboard boxes they never bothered to unpack. Lexi fell the hardest. Without Trent, without her golden child status, and without a parental safety net, reality hit her like a freight train. She was 27 years old with no practical skills and a mountain of consumer debt from the emergency credit cards they maxed out for the backup wedding venue. She was forced to enter the workforce for the first time in her life. She found employment at a discount retail chain, standing on her feet for 9 hours a day, scanning clearance items and dealing with angry customers. Her designer handbags were sold to a local consignment shop just to make rent. The girl who spent her teenage years vacationing in Europe on my stolen trust fund now spent her weekends folding polyester shirts for minimum wage. With the house officially vacant, I took possession of the property. I unlocked the front door and walked through the silent rooms. The air felt heavy with old memories, but they no longer held any power over me. I stood in the kitchen, where Brenda once demanded I empty my savings for catering. I walked through the living room, where Richard used to lecture me about hard work while sitting on my stolen inheritance. I did not feel any lingering anger. I only felt the cold, calculating focus of an investor inspecting a new asset. I hired a crew of professional contractors the very next morning. We tore up the stained carpets and replaced them with polished hardwood. We knocked down the outdated dining room wall to create a modern, open-concept layout. We painted over the dreary beige walls with crisp, bright colors. Every trace of my parents' existence was systematically erased, scraped away, and thrown into a rented dumpster sitting in the driveway. The renovation took 6 weeks. When the fresh paint dried and the staging furniture was arranged, I listed the property on the open market. The neighborhood was highly desirable, and the pristine upgrade sparked a bidding war. Within 10 days, I accepted an all-cash offer from a young dual-income couple relocating from out of state. I paid Gregory his initial investment plus the 20% premium we agreed upon. After settling the closing costs and the outstanding liens, I walked away with a staggering profit. The house that served as my childhood prison transformed into a massive financial windfall. I recovered the $75,000 Richard embezzled from my grandfather, plus decades of lost compound interest. A lesser person might have taken that fortune and disappeared onto a tropical beach, but I remembered the cold nights I spent worrying about textbooks and grocery bills. I remembered the isolation of realizing the people supposed to protect me were actually hunting my bank accounts. I knew there were other young women trapped in similar nightmares, drowning in debt created by toxic families desperate for a lifeline. I scheduled a meeting with Diane at the accounting firm. Together, we drafted the charter for a new philanthropic foundation. I named it the William Ashford Grant in honor of the only man who ever tried to build a safety net for me. The foundation functioned as a financial literacy and legal rescue program. We provided aggressive legal counsel for young adults escaping financial abuse, helping them freeze compromised credit dispute, fraudulent loans originated by family members, and secure their own housing. The first scholarship check went to a 19-year-old nursing student whose mother had opened 5 hidden credit cards in her name. Watching that young woman sign the paperwork, seeing the sheer relief wash over her face as she realized she was no longer trapped, provided a level of satisfaction no amount of money could buy. My grandfather's legacy was finally restored. He wanted his wealth to build a secure future, and I ensured his wish became a permanent reality. My parents tried to reach out one last time. A week before Richard reported to federal prison, a handwritten letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to the apartment above the laundromat. The envelope felt thin. I did not open it. I did not care if it contained an apology, a curse, or another desperate plea for cash. I walked over to my kitchen sink, struck a match, and held the corner of the envelope over the open flame. I watched the paper curl and turn black, dropping the ashes into the stainless steel basin. I turned on the faucet and washed the remnants down the drain. The silence that followed was profound and beautiful. It is a Saturday evening now. I am sitting on the expansive balcony of my new condominium. The property sits high on a ridge overlooking the jagged peaks of the Colorado mountains. The air up here is crisp and clean, smelling of pine needles and fresh snow. The sun is dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and gold. I hold a crystal glass of expensive Cabernet in my hand. I am 31 years old, my credit score is flawless, my career is thriving, my personal boundaries are forged from iron. I am entirely unbothered by the wreckage left behind in that suburban town. I did not merely survive the betrayal of my own blood. I orchestrated their downfall using the exact same financial rules they tried to weaponize against me. They thought they could use me as fuel to keep their illusions burning. Instead, they handed me the matches. I burned their toxic empire to the ground, and from those ashes, I built a kingdom of my own.